So, welcome to lecture number 5 in network security. So let's have a look at what was the last status last week. So we were discussing possible architectures for networks and discussing what kind of challenges we typically face. What we identified 3 elements that we want to look into. So if we have a use case, for example, with a company offering services to the outside world, so they have some internal departments that want to work together. So let's describe it as here. So this should be the internal network, where let's say here are some printers, there are some file servers, and they should be able to connect to each other and access their local services. So they internally should be allowed to have some access to their offered devices and everything that's available. What we have as a second step is to have some kind of externally reachable elements such as web server, email server, any kind of servers accessible through the internet from the outside world. That's in a different category. So basically we want to allow access from the outside world, which is not allowed here. Here it should be allowed, and still it should be under the control of the company. And finally, if we have some kind of remote operations, some remote workers here, they should have some way to become virtually part of this local network. So this is for home office users, for example. And there should be some technology that allows to integrate them in this topology as if they would be locally on site. Okay, so we need actually as a core element three things. So first we need some kind of filter that limits access, and traffic that is passing through. So we will use this kind of filter, this kind of firewall at various positions that allows us to shape what kind of traffic is allowed to pass it. So for example, at this point there should be no traffic coming from outside permitted, which is not a reply to a previous request. So of course here's probably some kind of HTTP request to the internet, to some kind of website, and the answer should be permitted. But if there's no request up front, then there should be no messages permitted from outside to the internal services, so in order to not expose any vulnerabilities. The second element that we want to talk about are intrusion detection systems, which basically allow us to look deep into the packets and have a reaction based on that. So this is some kind of internal protection service. So it looks into every message, and the simplest one is, so the filter is very simple, it's just pass or drop. Here we of course also are able to pass the message, but we can also detect an alarm, some authorities, if we detect in the traffic some kind of known signatures, some known patterns of attacks. And we can also correlate data. That means while the filter looks at packets individually, every individual packet is looked at and decided, okay, where is it from, where should it go to, is it allowed or not. So each decision is made independently. In an intrusion detection system, we are able to correlate over various traffic flows and then basically come to a decision whether to let it pass or whether we inform somebody, whether we take a second opinion. So, and the last part is to have some kind of virtual private network. That means that this node, although existing somewhere else in the internet, should be part of this internal network as if it would be on-site and with the same privileges, and obviously the whole communication should look like as if the participant should be would be in the local site, at the local network site. Okay, so we started last time with the firewalls, basically, and this is roughly also where we ended. So we will, what is the main purpose? So first it separates two areas of a network from each other. Yeah, so it's here you have a network, there you have a network, and in between you have a firewall. And the firewall has the ability to just allow something through or not. So it's just a pass or a dropping of the message. So, and this can be implemented on various layers. So in the network layering system, we can have it at a network layer. That's a classical firewall, what you typically have, where the focus will be on IP addresses and some ports. Yeah, so also some information from the transport layer is taken into account. That's a typical approach. So it's just like letter, where you have a look for whom is this letter and who's the sender of the letter, and that's it. Then there's some kind of higher layer firewalls, which typically are looking also into the kind of traffic that is sent. So here the kind of traffic is not considered in the classical firewall. It's like really you consider every letter by itself, but you do not look into the envelope. And in application layer proxies and transport layer proxies, there you would look into the behavior at the corresponding layers. And I think, didn't we had an example for that? So let me just have a look. Yeah, we will have that. Okay. So this is the one example I think we had also an exercise, which is an application layer proxy. And application layer proxy, always keep in mind this is some kind of filter. Typically it's also accompanied by a network filter, so that any kind of HTTP traffic, for example, if it's an application, the protocol in focus is HTTP, then you typically would set a second network filter in parallel that disallows any kind of traffic passing the regular filter. Only traffic from the proxy should be permitted to reach web servers. So by this you can basically control that clients who want to access some HTTP server have to go through the proxy, because their regular requests would be dropped based on what is written on the envelope, basically passing the firewall. So, and for what purposes can this be used? Yeah, one application use case is that while HTTP traffic is now monitored by the proxy, you can, for example, limit that no post commands are allowed, or you can look into, let's say, the HTTP upload of files. How large is the file? What's the file name? To disallow the upload of specific files which come from specific sources or larger than X megabytes or so. So you can really go into the details and use the data in the HTTP protocol to make decisions whether the message should be allowed or not. Okay. In addition, so yeah, here some examples. So the core element is that the proxy really understands the application layer protocol, so that it really can fine-tune what you want. And typically it's used by companies to control where you upload data to. So for example, not to competitors, not to Dropbox or any external sources, or to limit the incoming data traffic to maybe, that's maybe also some element. So if this is the internet connection, you have a proxy and you have here several clients. The proxy eventually is the only node that is communicating with the HTTP server. So all other clients are communicating with the proxy. So sometimes the proxy is also used as a cache, meaning that prominently and frequent requests cached, and basically if client A asks for the data and later client B, then the second request doesn't have to go through the HTTP server, but the proxy can answer it from its cache. But yeah, mostly it is used to, on one side, protect that no data is unintentionally uploaded to some external servers, or on the other side to hide the various clients from the HTTP server to have some kind of vulnerability hardening, so that potential weaknesses on the clients are not exposed to the server. Yeah, and one example that we used is Squid. This is a very simple HTTP proxy that caches files, that acts as a proxy, and I think as you have also, did you complete the Squid example in the lab? So there's also, I think, one example where basically if A communicates with the proxy, the proxy will also modify data that is sent, for example, in the headers. So here, for example, you write an HTTP GET. I think it will come in the next exercise, either in this one or in the next one. And you had here Mozilla. And the proxy is able to modify the header I mean, there's no real header in HTTP, but it can modify this information and then, for example, simply pass on the HTTP GET request. But modify how it's written. Wow, is this great delay? That's a good sign. So I learned also something about my notebook. So if there's a delay in the writing, that means it lacks energy. Yeah, text is still not completed. Okay, but this is good to know. So now it should be more. So for example, you can, great. So what do we do to change? Or of course, we could also write Safari, but these are some examples how you can change the data that is sent out. Maybe you can also think of, in the meanwhile, why would it make sense to change Mozilla in this lettering to Mozilla in this lettering? Okay, what we also have is SOX proxies. That means for the transport layer. Typically for TCP, because there's more complexity in it, and it's, let's say, for some kind of authentication that is introduced. So that where you basically, between two machines, establish some kind of permanent kind of SOX proxy connection, that you are authenticated, you are participant A, and if they see, okay, you are really that participant, then you are allowed to connect to some further extended services. So it's more on some way to introduce some authentication. If these services don't support authentication, and this service does, and you can somehow delegate the task of authentication to an external or third party which acts then as a SOX proxy. Okay. So let's see what we look into today. So we now start with the packet firewalls, filter firewalls in more depth, and they are really quite simple. So they have very limited elements that they look at, and they have very limited options to act. So what they do is typically they consider both the network and the transport layer, rarely a link layer also. We will have a look. But typically it takes the IP source and destination address and the port source and destination. And this is such as an envelope information. It tells who the sender is, it tells who the recipient should be. It doesn't look into the packet. and it has to decide, so it applies a set of rules, yeah, and it looks what's the first rule that applies to this package based on the IP and port characteristics. And the rules can have, I mean, it's very simple, either pass or drop. That's the typical actions that they are. You will also see that some newer approaches also add the MAC information, as a MAC addresses, and you also get some kind of alarm or ask some kind of server, or to not write server, but to ask the controller for further directions. So some newer versions have further possibilities, but the core elements, the core functionality that is still mostly widespread, just have the limited consideration of IPs and ports and pass or drop. So let's have a look what we have, and here we have some kind of IP addresses associated to the devices. This firewall has two network connections, so two IP addresses. And let's think of some kind of rule set that we could use for accessing the mail server. That should be the example, so we will come back to this in a minute. Okay, so very general. So what kind of traffic should be set up in the firewall that should be permitted? If you have this kind of, so there we have the mail server, we have the internet. How would you set up the filter in the red firewall? Yeah, maybe to add a little bit more information to that. So SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, is a protocol for transmitting emails on the internet. It's about sending emails, not about receiving them. So typically, if you communicate with your email program, with your email server, then the email program that you use uses SMTP to transfer the email, and if you want to download it, so for receiving, it's then often POP or IMAP. So it's about sending emails. And for that, it uses TCP and port 25. So typically, you have then SMTP server listening under port 25, and messages can be sent using that port. Yeah, the mail is then transmitted over this port, and also other servers can also communicate with each other, also using, so for further follow-up communication. Okay, so in our example, what do we have to support? So just to have a look, incoming TCP connections from outside to port 25 of the mail server, and outgoing TCP connections to the mail server from the mail server to port 25 on other machines, and each including reply and acknowledgement packets. So that means, in our simple example, if you have here port 25, it should be TCP, so this is also something that needs to be specified for which port it counts. Then the firewall should allow from our, let's call it mail server M, so this should be the IP address. So the outgoing from M and source port 25, no, sorry, not source port 25, but destination port 25, so it fits. Contact some other server also on port 25 that represents the action when M wants to send a message to another mail server on the port 25. Then incoming, so meaning from this interface to destination M and destination port 25 as well. Yes. And one further element that we need to add is that's a little bit low space plus all answers. If you just specify to allow messages passing in, let's say the outgoing messages from M with some destination port 25 to any kind of server, if you allow that, that's fine. But if a message comes back, you somehow also need to accept that. And the question is that considering a reply is somehow specific, because you cannot, you have to keep track of what kind of history of messages there were. Is it a reply or is it new fresh message? So we'll have some examples, let's say. So let's see how the first rules we have should be. So all packets must be come from the mail server or go to the mail server. All other servers we do not consider, so we just as a default have to discard messages, and now we want to see which messages we should in addition allow. So it's about messages going in coming from the mail server. It should be TCP packets, and it should come or go to port 25. So this is our source, this is our mail server and the destination port 25. That means that M wants to send some mail to some other server under port 25. That should be allowed. Then if the destination is our main server, mail server, and somebody, so this is basically somebody else from external side is sending our mail server under port 25 a message. Okay, this is it's okay. I understand. So I understand. Okay. So this is, sorry, this is not, this is the case. Some other mail server sends us a mail. So this is our server. And our mail server from 25 is allowed to send out messages to X, yeah, to external sites, and X from 25 is allowed to send us messages. Is that right? Is it how we wanted to consider it? Just think about it. So basically now we have all kind of communication described, mostly with M should be involved either as source or destination, and either to receive it on port 25 or to use port 25 as an out as a sending port. Okay, let's assume this is the example to cover this use case where our mail server should be accessible from outside. All other devices should not be able to, I mean, we didn't specify how their traffic should be treated, but this mail server should be able to be accessed from the outside and send out messages itself. Okay, so let's see how this is realized. So typically one example is that you have it, let's say in Linux, there you have typically a kernel that is at the very low network processing layer basically, and considering IP tables as a kind of rule set to decide whether a message should be passed or not. So if you use some kind of Linux machine as a router, then typically you can also set up a firewall functionality in that Linux machine. And let's have a very quick overview on that, just to give you an impression how this works. Okay, so typically this table is then considered. So if you have an incoming traffic, then you can say here's some IP table, and the table should define whether it should pass the message or whether it should drop. And so it should be discarded and should not be used. So in this IP table is some kind of rule set where you can specify individual criteria by which a decision is made to pass or to drop the message. Okay, so how does this work? So if it becomes active during the processing of a packet, if a packet comes in, this packet is called, then it is checked, is there some applying rule? And if yes, then the corresponding reaction should be initiated. For us, it is important here to get a filter table that really acts as this filter functionality. There are also some other tables, such as mangle, nut, or raw. Maybe, one is to change packets for some purposes. For example, you could modify specific header fields. In network address translation, you also want to specify dedicatedly the addresses used in the IP header. So in order, if you, for example, have a local area network and they all have their local area, local network IP addresses, 192.168, I don't know, 100, for example. But in the external world, you just have one public IP address, so you cannot, for example, you cannot all use public IP address, local IP addresses, because local IP addresses are not routable in the internet. And then, let's say this would be 199, this would be 198. And this network address translation table has then the responsibility to exchange the sender's IP address, which is a local one, to the globally routable one, and then when the reply comes in, then to re-exchange it to the local area network address. Okay, but so what I just want to say, there are various tables that are applied. If a message is coming in, then you apply the tables, and then there's some kind of outgoing packet or not. I mean, this is what IP tables does here. So how is it set up? So it uses chains. Chain is quite simple to consider. You specify some criteria, and if they match, then you have a corresponding reaction defined. So, for example, what kind of chains do we have here? There are some chains. These are some subcategories in the table. For input, here packets coming from outside are examined. Then there's the output chain. This is for packets from local programs examined. And the forward, here packets examined which are passed through during routing, so where the corresponding host is neither recipient nor destination. So, and if we are a router, so basically supporting, so there are other routers, and let's say we have implemented our firewall in this machine here, then typically the firewall is not a recipient and final destination of messages, nor does it really generate messages by its own. This whole purpose is basically to forward messages, and then this kind of chain would be more reasonable, let's say, to apply. Okay, let's say how such an IP table rule is set up. So it's a chain, that means, let's say, this filter chain has typically a set of rules. These are all individual lines that are specified, and you can think of it as really some kind of filter where the packet comes in at the top, and it's considered, it is compared to layer by layer, line by line, and they all define criteria when a message should be passed, so when it should be delivered, and if no rule applies, then at the end then there's the discard rule, which basically throws the packet away if in previous rules it has not been decided to forward this message on. So basically we have to put our criteria in some kind of rules, in this kind of individual lines in the filter table, and if one of the criteria match, then it's the corresponding action that needs to be executed when the rule matched. So rules can be created, deleted with the IP tables command. You can basically modify this kind of table and the rules that are listed there. So for example, here you have the IP tables command. It should modify the chain, so the filter chain, the filter table. The command is then to append a rule. That's the table. The filter table in the chain of forwarding messages. So where we are not the destination node and not the recipient node. And here's an example. So this is the criteria. So if it's a message which has a destination IP address of this, and the message is using TCP and the destination port is 25, then the outcome, the rule, should be to accept the packet. So this would, it's basically not really too much what you can define. So you have the destination, you have S, you have a port, so source port and destination port, and the protocol. So basically, mainly these 5 elements will define how you compose your rules. So what these 5 elements: so source, destination IP address, the transport layer, protocol used, and the port numbers for destination and source. Okay, so up to now we had the source and destination. That's good. We talked about the source and destination ports. They are considered. Then the transport layer protocol, TCP, UDP, ICMP. Here's something else. This is something new. You can also specify from which interface it's coming. So especially if you are a firewall, you have not just one interface, but maybe 2. The internal network and the external network. And by really separating them, you enforce both networks. If they want to communicate, they have to go through the firewall. So, and here you can specify the incoming or outgoing interface in addition to the IP address where the message is coming from. Okay. Yes, what could be your possible results? You could drop it, meaning to delete the message. You can accept it, meaning to pass the message, or you could lock the message, typically in addition to dropping or accepting it. Okay, so this is the very basic building block. Typically you have here 2 options, here 2 options, 2 and 1. So you have 7 options for the criteria, and you have mostly 2 possible outcomes of this filtering decision. Okay, so let's see if you write down our setup. So keep in mind, what did we want? We wanted, if here's the internet, here's our firewall, and here's the mail server, So, this was the setup. This is the mail server M. So this is here M. And it's listening on port 25. And also messages going out are also sent from port 25. So please have a look at the at these rules and see whether you find them good or something bad, or is it reasonable or not. Yeah, maybe one information. So this is the default rule, which basically stands at the very end. If all rules before have been checked and there's no matching rule, then this default rule would be applied. So let's have a look. So we want to only allow messages to port 25 on our server. Do you see that as, did we realize that? So is it done? Is it good? Do you, yep.
Either they get handed or how does it work? Because usually it goes from top to bottom and then it's first.
That's right. So it's a little bit, so this you should think of here. This is the default rule that is not applied in space, in that space that it's standing in that place, but it will be executed at the end if no other rule applied. So the last rule has a look that the recipient should be our server and the source port should be 25. So let's assume we have here some very nice, I don't know, file hosting or website, or I don't know, something private that should not be accessible. Would that be accessible, or is only our web server, our mail server reachable and the port 25 reachable?
It's only for 25.
It's only for port 25. So our secret HTTP server is not reachable. What would you say?
Yeah, it's not reachable.
Okay, so it's not reachable. So, yes, yeah.
Only don't accept each connect for every connection with our attacker and has the source port 170, 112, 77, and also the source port 25.
So yes, so if the attacker connects as a destination our internal mail server and it uses as a source port 25, which is totally controlled, so the attacker can anyway choose any kind of port it wants from its own device that it sends messages from, and if in this combination it can access any kind of destination port, so it's not specified, so it could be any port and it can do any kind of traffic into that not specified port. So this would be, for example, a problem how to configure the firewall, because the sender controls one part of the criteria, especially the source port, and we just said any connection from that specific source port to our server would be allowed. This is one example. So yeah.
Isn't this the same problem for the second group?
Yes, but okay. Here, this is our server, and our server would be allowed to use port 25 and access any kind of external server. So let's extend the example, and now the internal clients should be allowed to establish arbitrary connections to the internet. But connections to the clients from outside should be forbidden. So let's say they want to access, I don't know, it's about port 80 outside. So destination could be port X and port 80, or Y and some TLS secured websites. So I mean there's a randomness in the ports that you want to be able to contact out from outside. In the outside. So how should we specify a rule to match this requirement, but at the same time that connections to the clients from outside should be forbidden.
Client, if someone from outside wants to connect, it shouldn't be allowed, or
what do you mean if somebody from outside wants to connect?
I mean, just I don't know, anything from
I mean, these are our internal clients. So let's say we know their IP addresses.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't know. So what we know is that source IP address, let's say 117.112.770/24. So if the first 24 bits in this, meaning the first three numbers, 117, 112.77 matches to an IP address, then that should be a source acceptable. I mean, of course, you could also specify more detail, 101, 102, 103, but let's say this is our public IP address range. So we don't know anything about the source port. We don't know anything about the destination port or the destination address. One moment. Or the destination address. So all of this is unknown. So let's say for outgoing traffic, we could specify that if the source is the specific IP addresses, our internal ones, then it should be passed. But what do we do with the replies? The problem is, as we don't know who is the recipient, we would be required to allow any message from any kind of potential source where the destination is what we had here, so this nodes A, B, C. And that's a problem because we basically then, what would the filter say? So accept any message as long as it addresses our internal devices. But this is not what we want. We just want to pass on messages that are replies to our previous message. So in this previous example, we would be needing to allow packets with arbitrary source and destination ports to and from our internal clients. So we don't know where our internal clients send messages to, so we potentially need to accept any kind of incoming messages, as it might be a reply. So obviously this is then useless. Also in the previous example that we already looked at is, so this we already covered, where the source address is random as long as the source address uses port 25, then it could access all our internal machines, so or at least the mail server. So you see, sometimes there are some bugs and some problems, but this is a quite critical case because we need to accept answers only. Okay, and this is some typical problem that we face, because we have to distinguish, and basically we need some kind of knowledge about what is an answer and what is not an answer. So allowing sync packets. That's probably okay. That might be some workaround, because we do not want that external messages are trying to establish a TCP connection to our internal nodes. So if you see some kind of sync packet, meaning this is some attempt to establish a connection, then we should drop it. But obviously this is also not quite sophisticated. So what we need, especially for this, is when is an answer and not a new discussion point. It is when previously we have sent messages to this node, and now we observe that from the same node that we contacted already, messages are coming back. And for this remembering, we need some kind of state. So in a stateful firewall, this is basically different in systematic to stateless firewalls. Here we keep some kind of track of the packets that we observe. So we need to know if a packet from the outside is a response or not. Yeah, because we just need to correlate whether responses should be accepted to pass, not responses, but established new connections should be dropped. Okay, and typically we can't tell that from a single packet itself. So if you get in a chain of packets a random middle part, then typically this does not contain any kind of information on is it an established connection or not. So for that we need to somehow see when to establish some kind of memory, some kind of state, and how do we use it. Okay, so a stateful firewall also observes the connections passing through it. It also has some table for existing connections, and each of these connections is assigned a state value. So it's basically keeping a track in which situation and this traffic is at the current moment. So is it already established? Is it during the process of establishment? Has it been partially already closed? So this is something that we want to see. Okay. Let's see how we use our information on the state here. So in the same example, now we again want to make sure that our mail server is only accessible from the outside, yeah, and so message should be able to come in to port 25, and message should be allowed to go out to port 25, so or to other ports. So we can already cover that case, but we were asking how do we cover this case with the end devices connected to this internal network and then connected to the internet. And if they send out messages with the browser, then the message should be able to come back. But if the same server applies later, then it should not be accepted. So let's have a look how this can be implemented. So what we need to let through is any packet from the inside. Yeah, if you want to send a message to the outside world, then feel free to do so. So incoming message, then there's this traffic for the mail server. So it should be from outside and going to port 25 of our mail server. Okay, that's fine. And this is something new. Packets from the outside belong to an existing connection. So we need to somehow keep track which messages have already been established sufficiently, and make a decision how to apply it. Okay, so what do we further have for stateful firewalls in IP tables? So also IP table supports this. Now we have the criterion of state, and it needs to be first loaded. And basically there are some predefined elements. So it's IP tables automatically looks into the traffic and keeps track of which connections are already established. So you can basically say if the state is new, then act differently if the state is related. Then this is an answer coming in. So the current packet is an answer. No, sorry, make it different. So it's let's take the simplest one. So this is the answer. So typically you send out the message, and now this established comes back. So here the answer comes back, and in this case you have a message communication ongoing. There's already some answer, but there's now a second answer coming for different kind of traffic, for example. Then you need not to have a previous request, but you can simply state in the rules if there's a second if there's some second communication channel required, then this is allowed, because the rule is that related traffic is allowed. Yes, then invalid traffic, this is if the file headers make no sense. So for example, if it doesn't start at the beginning with some connection-oriented handshake for TCP, if TCP performs some further illegal activities in the meantime of running, that would be also not good and considered invalid. Okay, so let's have an example. What do we want to do? So we wanted to have here's the internet, here's our firewall, then we have here our 3 machines, and here was the mail server. So 3 machines, A, B, and C. So this is also a table for the forwarding chain, for the forward table. The default rule should be drop. So and now what should be the rules? So first, if the message has some strange headers, something is mixed, something is wrong, then these messages should be dropped to not further propagate malicious or problematic information, as we have found now a message with invalid headers. So the next one, if we have messages with the source from the inside, also clearly stating from this interface to that interface, then it should be accepted. So let's have a look. So if we have now messages from this source IP address, and the message is passing through this interface into the firewall, then all of it should be accepted. Yes. So here we have used the interface information. And then the other rule, if something from outside comes in to something inside, and it's using also TCP, and the destination is to our local devices. Oh, sorry, this is our mail server. So something accessing our mail server at the mail server port, then it should be also accepted. And everything that comes from within, so these are both our internal devices, A, B, C, as well as M. And it's coming from inside, and it's going to outside. And it is in the state of it's an established or related communication, then accept it. So basically this is the new element about the stateful filters, so that you can specify that a message is correlated to another ongoing traffic as the state of the transfer is related, meaning that it has observed how the connection has been established, that there's some message exchanged, and then it can close it again. But the system has observed that this is happening, so this is somehow then known to be related. To know that it's established. Related is an example, just to give you a short. It's the next one. So related, it seems a little bit unusual, because it means, let's say, if this is our internal server M, and it sends out a message, it gets a reply, but there's now a second stream coming. this could be, for example, you are visiting a website, you click on a button, please play the video, you get HTTP back, and here's some kind of stream. So what you can have sometimes is that some external node connects to you because it is assumed that this is the reasonable next step. Okay, so at the same time it's connected and there's already an existing connection. Establishment of an additional connection at the application layer, that's considered here. And how is it realized? So first of all, it needs some kind of memory where you can keep track of all observed messages. And when they have been established, so that you know this message, this connection is established. So I saw how the TCP synchronized message was sent out. I saw how the TCP synchronized acknowledgement comes in. So they have established a core connection that needs to be tracked off. And there should be a timeout so that over the time, of course, these old messages, these old connections that might not be used anymore, are not anymore viewed. Okay.
Question.
Yep.
How's the state check actually realized? Is it with the header ID or?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So how is the state of being established is realized? So it doesn't work for UDP. So UDP is not, was it here? No. Okay. So UDP doesn't use the concept of a reply. It uses more concept of individual datagrams, such as letters. So for UDP it cannot be applied, but for TCP it can. And TCP follows a three-way handshake. So typically you have the SYN packet, then you have a SYN ACK. So both setting the flag for SYN to real, and for ACT, so for acknowledgement, and there's some further acknowledgement. So basically you need this kind of three-way handshake with setting the right header in the first SYN, synchronize, then synchronize and acknowledge, and then last is acknowledge only. And the question is, by this, basically you have then also timestamp when the message when a synchronized message have been observed from inside to the outside. That means, oh, some internal node tries to establish a connection. If then I set up some kind of rule. If the next time messages arrive for this source device that's in our network, then check some further properties. And then our reply comes back, and the reply should have this kind of flags set. And then if I see these two patterns, so some internal node sent a SYN message out, TCP message, and the answer in form of SYN synchronized and acknowledgement bits are set, that means that our that we have identified in our memory some kind of path that we are able to use later on. And if later on some message comes in with this exact IP address combination, so something that we already knew that there's an established connection associated to, then it can be accepted.
Is it only IP? Because we can manipulate the packets, can't we?
Yeah, it's only IP and TCP. Yeah.
Because doesn't the ACK part also contain the packet header ID +1? So that's because there are probably dozens of SYN packets reaching the server at the same time. So they also sort out to which sender the response should go to. That's why we have the random packet ID, right?
One moment. I mean, yes, there are many packets going in and out, but there are not so many synchronized and synchronized acknowledgement packets. So if we would just filter for those header fields, whether they are set or not, the number of messages sent out would drastically reduce. So typically, if you would, I mean, that we can clearly see which packets. No, I'm not really understanding. So the question is, how to identify that these messages are opening a connection, because once we have a look at that, so once we see that the synchronize and synchronize egg flags are set, then we just put it in a new memory and memorize the source port, destination port, source IP address, destination IP address. That's it. And if some message comes in and matches this kind of criteria, with source IP and so on, then we know, okay, we have a connection already established to this node. So if the command is to accept established messages, then we just put it in our accept list. Did I get your answer, your question right?
That seems a bit insecure, I think. If that's like the only measurement of when we forward packets based on the firewall rule.
Why? I mean, what is your concern?
I mean, if this is the only check, and and okay, and I don't know. But I think, I don't know, you're a server and we as the students are clients that want to talk to you, and we all simultaneously, because something arises, and you somehow need to sort out from whom you want to send the answer back.
Mm-hmm.
If this have simultaneously, I don't know. We also have different ideas about this.
I'm not really sure whether I got some counterexample what could happen, because the question is always, is this the last thing that really and the only thing to protect? But one core element that is applied to, if let's say A and B want to communicate, they just put themselves as a destination and then they can communicate. Yeah. And if somebody would claim to be true, so to be Alice, and send out I'm Alice, so I'm the source IP of Alice and this is sent to B, then B still replies to Alice. So the routing in the internet works so properly that the messages destined for specific nodes are always sent to the right person, although in the sending there could be some kind of masquerading, but the recipient is always correct. So, and if we have a three-way handshake to establish a TCP connection, then both parties need also to verify that they are really reachable by this IP address. So, and if both are reachable by this IP address, and we have specified our rules based on IP addresses and ports, typically you don't have so much struggles in implementing it as by using the simple memory just to see. Okay, maybe we go through. So if we have here some message from a source IPA to B and port, let's say, I don't know, 4000. We send a message out, and we also set synchronize. We want to establish a TCP connection to IP address B, port 80, let's say. Okay. Now it needs to be confirmed, and there's then the confirmation also for this SYN acknowledgement. So, and now we have all information together to just put into a table. We already saw a message from source to destination with ports. Okay, so we already know there's A and B, and we know that A stands for 4000 and B receives 80. Okay, so and this is our memory table now, yeah, and the next time, after some time, a message goes out and it has the same pattern, then we can accept it as established, and if B sends us something back, then we can also accept it as established connection. So it's part of an established connection. And previously, so let's say B is sending to A something from port, I don't know, 50,000 to port 4,000. At this point, it might be accepted because there's an established connection. And if you would have the same up here before the connection is established, then we can, for example, have it dropped. So the change, the impact on each individual message can also change depending on in which state the communication is.
Wouldn't this violate integrity if truly
Yes.
okay,
So
source A sent to port 80 and the server thinks, okay, yeah, that's fine, you are probably A, and I don't know, and then the response from the server would still go to actually A, but the message has been sent already.
I have to. So I'm not sure whether there are some further nodes involved. So if you just have A and B and in the middle some filter. I mean, of course, there are also some other possible recipients, but so let's say if the filter is here, so which message is already sent when it's maybe too late? So if A sends out a message, let's say A is our internal node, then any message from A is anyway allowed to pass, and from B only if it's established, only if we had seen previously some message addressing B from the inside. So once we need to have an element initiated by A to establish a connection of B in order to have it in the established list. So what did I miss?
Can you maybe turn A and B around? So
Oh no, that we cannot. Because A is internal. So if B is sending us a message from outside and it's not an established connection, it's not accepted. Because if B initiates the contact from outside and then the message arrives at our firewall and we look into our established table and we see we don't have any entry, A did not send out the message to B, we are not expecting any answer, so the message of B is dropped. And then if A establishes a connection to B, so because A is internal, the message of A is going out, so the handshake first element of handshake, and because A initiated this, we can already write that into our established list, and then we can also accept that because this combination is already in our established list, and then the acknowledgement the same. So now we have initiated by some internal node the connection to the outside world. Yes? No?
yes.
Okay. Okay. And related, it's a little bit close. This is if it's not about the exact same ports, but it's also accepting partially closed ports, or I mean, it's something when typically the destination that we contacted up front also uses a second communication channel. Some old protocols made that distinction. So, for example, you have some kind of one data stream for commands and one data stream for the data, and these are two data streams in total, and it might be that it's originated by the external party, and here we can say this is related because it's associated to it. Okay, so what's the good and bad of stateful firewalls? The good is for most practical use case it's reasonable, but they're also more complex, so they have longer rules. Sometimes they're very long, and that requires CPU time. Typically, this is also combined with network address translation, because network address translation has some very similar property. I'm not sure. So in Kona we had that network address translation. Do you know what this is? Yes, no? Yes, okay. So basically it's about if you have one public IP address and you have many private IP addresses to share with, and it keeps track of which IP address and which port has been internally used in order to request the message to the public server. And once, so basically you need to replace this internal address with the external IP address and send then the message out, and if the message comes in you have to replace again that A can be addressed again. So, and basically here we have also a simple firewall, because here we have a table which tells us, okay, if A as an internal IP address has been sending a message from source X, then we exchange it to the external IP address, and let's say we use port ID Y because we want to keep control ourselves in this NAT position, which ports are used, so it should not depend on other parties as it would be if we just take over the same port. Naja. And so if somebody is then contacting the server and it is at the same time addressing this specific port that we selected, then we know, okay, this port is associated to this instance application, and we can replace it by our internal IP address and port. So this already acts as some kind of filter, because without an entry in this NAT table, there's no movement. So if there's no entry, the message is not accepted anyway. So it already has some kind of properties of a stateful firewall, so they can be combined. Both need a table about the state of open connections. So it can be also combined and really used. Okay. Yeah, good. Now I had here the slides. Very good. So this was the NAT example where we have the internal firewall, the internal IP addresses. So this is the local IP address, which is not routable in the internet, and we use an IP port that we selected our own, and now a message comes and we should send it to this external PC, external host on port 80. And now the NAT creates the following: it replaces the internal IP address by the external IP address. So this is this, and it selects a port that it has available. So it also replaces the port, the source port. So this is only the source information. And then it is sent out, so very similar to a proxy. And then the message comes in, addressing the same port. And this 5678 is then translated to this IP and port combination in order to use again the local private private address again. So, and if there's no entry coming from, so let's say you get an email address, you get a packet for 9272.135.61, but the port is 444. Whom should the NAT deliver this message to? So there's not just one PC, there are also further, let's say 10, 20, 50 PCs, which are using this single public IP address. So to which should it forward the message to? It doesn't know. There's no clue, so it would drop the message. So it acts as some kind of firewall as well. Currently, NAT network address translation is some kind of hack. Yeah, it was some kind of tool to address the scarcity of messages. Yeah, because typically there are so many devices with private IP addresses. I think also now when you go to you join the network here, the Wi-Fi, you get some kind of private IP address that is then through the NAT router replaced by this kind of table that allows to be more efficient. So basically we have the translation table, and the translation table that acts in order to be able to communicate with various private IP addresses to the outside world. It also by accident manages that incoming messages we do not have a corresponding IP port that they were sent from are discarded. So it has also some kind of security feature as well. Okay. Okay, so far I think with the firewalls you have some, so anytime if you have some question, also firewalls, please feel free. Okay, there will be something more. Okay, so let's see how firewalls can be placed. And so one of the elements is there can be also some kind of transparent proxies in combination with firewalls, often also with HTTP. So typically what you can do is that if you have a proxy, you do not want to allow that the client can bypass your proxy. So if you set up a proxy that checks the traffic for outgoing vulnerabilities or incoming problems, it doesn't make sense to allow the user to circumvent it by using no proxy or some other services. So what is done by these transparent proxies, that there's a proxy set up, maybe also some of the clients are configured to use the transparent proxy, but the clients are not trusted that everybody updates their somehow I lost the so the clients do not, so you want to basically enforce that the client communication for HTTP, for example, passes always the proxy, but you do not trust the client that he configured his system correctly. So therefore you add some kind of firewall rule that catches all HTTP traffic and reconnects them to the transparent proxy, so that at the end all internal devices who use this firewall will have to forward problematic emails there, or problematic HTTP requests, or all HTTP requests at all, so that they can be analyzed. So it's basically the firewall can replace this messages. The proxy pretends to be the web server, but internally it requests the real website. So the client won't notice. This can be implemented so that the client doesn't have to configure his system to use a proxy, but all messages are anyway forwarded to a proxy. Okay, up to now we have looked at basically the case. Here we have A, there we have a router, and somewhere in the router is some kind of firewall implemented, and then it goes out to the internet. But we have also firewalls in the host, so also A has a firewall. Typically, in the Windows firewall is a typical example. Let me just see. Can I open here some kind of specific rules? Yeah, firewall. Yeah. So typically you have the firewalls in the network, you have the firewalls in the hosts, so you try to really establish it at various different points. Yeah, and here's some example for my firewall. I'm not really sure how dangerous this is to show, but there are some kind of examples in which kind of networks this is allowed to use. So whether, I don't know, this game It Takes Two is allowed to communicate in private and public networks, both social, public and private. So you can specify which detailed traffic is anyway always permitted or partially permitted on specific networks permitted. So and then you have a firewall at this host in A, then you have it somewhere in the middle between, this typically is either internal as dedicated point somewhere on the line, or you have it in the next router dedicated. So there are many options where to place firewalls. So in general, if you set up some rules, so I think there will be also some kind of example to test it. Better to be to allow too little than too much. So if you put in too little rules and the discard rule is applied very frequently, then you can still add some further exceptions. So some pass rules, but if you make it too broad and everything's accepted, then you typically don't notice. So make it as tight as possible in the beginning and see whether something fails. If something did fail, then you can still open up some further rules and define some further rules. So if it doesn't work, check the logs and firewalls, which rule made the packet to drop, and then think about what the change should be. Yeah, reflect what would have been right. Think about what, yeah, step by step, small step by step to extend the firewall so that you have a full overview of what is happening, and yeah, that you also have some fun in creating this kind of firewalls matching your use case. Okay, never trust your own capabilities too much. This is also some common guidelines. So there are many ongoing, there's lots of things that you can consider, and something that you also don't know, and many pitfalls that can happen. So typically also our example was very simple. There's lots of things to learn, so better to read a lot and always be humble that probably there's some mistakes in your own setup. So do not trust yourself, do not trust others too much. Always be very cautious in how to create the rules. Don't take any kind of simple rules from the internet blindly, that they might also have some problems. And try to be simple, as complexity makes it harder to maintain. Okay, so as a short outlook in what we can do and how do we identify open ports and open activities that we can basically, that might pose vulnerabilities. So let's have a quick look at a few tools that we might also use in this context. So one of those is Nmap, Network Mapper. And the idea is to try, it just checks the availability of ports and of openness of ports, and it's quite nice to test. So what it does is you can specify that it checks a set of ports on a given machine, and it tells you whether they are open or not. You can also tell it to try to find out which protocols are running, and in which version even more. So it's quite, goes beyond many elements. It has some methods to determine open ports, which are not identified, detailed analysis of the behavior of computers on certain packets. You can check which programs are running and their versions and so on. So it's really a nice program to look into network analysis. So here's some example. This might also shortly conclude. So you can, for example, either install it on your own, or you can use the ones provided. It's quite simple to use. So let's have a look whether some kind of live activity works. Nmap, scanme, nmap.org. It's still working. Okay, now it's sending out the various messages, I hope. Just leave it alone. And what it does, it checks, let's say, the first 1024 ports, what state they have. So, for example, based on TCP, whether they are accepting to establish a new connection to this port. If it's not allowed to establish a new connection to that port, then it might be already used. So you might learn about which ports are open in this given network, yeah, in this given setup. Do we already have some results? No. Okay. Nah, good. Then let's try. I don't know, Graffi. So this is this should have at least port number 80 open and 443 so far. Now it's very interesting. And this, I don't know. Maybe it's not allowed here. Maybe there are some kind of firewall rules active that disallow my network scans. I don't know. So, but this should be one example how you get some results, what ports are open. Okay, and tightly connected to it is also some kind of vulnerability scanner. So once you know which ports are open, you could apply some further tools to find out, is behind these ports some program running? Okay. Is behind these ports some service running or not? And if there's a service running, do I find out based on the reply what messages, what versions it has, so whether I can check up there's a vulnerability ongoing or not in that server. Okay, so step by step we will come in the next lecture to the intrusion detection system. By this we will have covered, at least now we have already covered the element of firewalls in this position. So we had set as our goal to look into firewalls. What they do, they're quite simple. Just to take IP address, source port, and the protocol and decide whether to drop or not. In the next lecture we look into intrusion detection systems and then into virtual private networks. So until now, have a good day and see you then in the next lecture.